Israel's bombings and ground operations in Gaza have shattered the lives of countless Palestinian children. And the scars of war are not just physical. Arwa Damon has witnessed their pain and suffering firsthand. She's the founder of INARA, a humanitarian organization that provides medical and mental health care to children in war zones. She's also a former CNN senior international correspondent and my former colleague, and she now joins us from inside Gaza. Arwa, welcome to our program. You've certainly worked in some dicey places, conflict zones, war zones, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, you name it. Talk to me about working in Gaza and why this time it feels different.
You know, it struck me my first trip into Gaza, and I'm currently on my fourth, and my first was back in March. And I just remember trying to put my finger on what it was that made Gaza so different. And it eclipsed the sheer scale and scope of the devastation and the destruction. It was when you really looked at people and the way that their souls had been just so psychologically obliterated. Every single system that even remotely would be life-supporting has been decimated. The triggers, the traumas are so constant. Take it from the drone that's buzzing overhead as if it's taunting people, saying, hey, you think you've survived this long? Oh, we can still get you to, I met a mother who came up to talk to us on the street. And she was saying, I'm so worried about my little boy because every single night he goes into these convulsions and he rocks back and forth, and I'm afraid that he's going to completely fall apart. And he started doing this after he saw his little sister decapitated, basically from the force of an Israeli bomb. And she said this in almost a very monotone sort of way. And she must have realized that I was confused by that, because then she said, yes, I know, but I have other children who need me. And it was in that moment that I realized that she had to bury her own pain, her own vision of seeing her own little girl decapitated so deep, because if she even allowed her voice to betray her inner emotions, she was going to break open completely. When you look at the children, look, it was recently International Day of the Children. We had this big event with, clowns and entertainers. And yes, you saw, a fair number of the children, engaging with what was around them. But then you also see a haunting number of them that they're just distant. They're not reacting to this fun and games the way that children normally would. And you really look at them and you feel as if they're there physically, but mentally they're sort of trapped inside this cage. I mean, there's so many examples that I could give you.
And I think we have actually some video of that day on a World Children Day that INARA, your organization, is trying to bring a little bit of joy, a little bit of hope for these children who will face a lifetime of trauma. Arwa, talk to me about navigating aid, which is desperately needed in Gaza. How difficult is it for an NGO like yourselves to operate? Is there any kind of coordination with the Israeli government to get people out of harm's way, to make sure aid gets to the right people? And do you ever worry about your own safety and the safety of your staff?
Look, it's an impossible situation. The system that is in place here, that has been sort of deliberately set up with all of its very different, aspects and set up by Israel, is almost crippling. The humanitarian sort of infrastructure, take it from the logistics of trying to get aid in and then moving it safely around Gaza, to the sheer number of humanitarian workers who have been killed, to the inability. I mean, I remember the other day I was reflecting on this. There are so many aid organizations on the ground here. I mean, how absurd is it that we are unable to provide for the population? How absurd is it?
Who do you blame for that? Who do you blame for that, Arwa? Who's to blame for this?
It's very, very much in the hands of Israel at this stage, very much in their hands. Because if we just look at the way this system is, yes, there are a number of crossing points that we are permitted to use, but look at the volume of what's actually crossing. it's barely a fraction. You know, there's a statistic that came out recently that stated that the average weight for a food truck, of which there is enough food on standby to feed the entire population of Gaza for 2 months. That food is not inside Gaza. The average wait time for a truck to cross from Kerem Shalom, or Karam Abu Salim as it's known, which is sort of the main crossing point that we're permitted to use for aid that feeds into the southern part of Gaza, is 74 days. That's how long a truck needs to wait on average. Now, a lot of these routes, once then a truck has actually been cleared by the Israeli side, Israel dictates to us which routes the trucks can use. A lot of these routes move through what's known as the red zone. The red zone are, areas, combat areas, although all of Gaza is basically a combat area, but these are combat areas fully under Israel's control, and this is where the looting happens.
So how are, I mean, there's so many heartbreaking stories, and I love how you're so passionate about being able to help people, and then it seems like you face one roadblock after another. But how are people living? How are they surviving when there's such serious shortages of food?
On the edge. I mean, this is barely survival. Earlier today, for example, I went to visit this 8-year-old boy, and he has a pre-existing congenital illness. His brain didn't fully form, and so he's extraordinarily vulnerable to begin with. This boy is so severely malnourished that at 8 years old, he weighs 6 kilograms. So in pounds, that's like roughly 13 pounds. His mother had been feeding him, if it can be called that, boiled rice and water through a syringe, because there's so little flour here in the southern and central part of the Gaza Strip that right now we're seeing, flour protests beginning to emerge again. There have been for weeks no fresh produce on the market, and then when produce finally does arrive, something like a single tomato costs $1.50. I mean, who in Gaza can actually afford that? You look at things like a source of protein. So there hasn't been chicken here, I think, for about 6 weeks right now. And so you have this reduction, severe reduction in humanitarian assistance that's coming in. Commercial trucks that used to come in and sort of feed the market, where, either organizations like mine could go and buy and distribute fresh vegetable parcels, albeit it was extremely expensive, but it was at least an option. Commercial trucks over the last 2 months, their numbers that Israel has been permitting to enter have been significantly reduced. And so people's ability to cope with the actual lack of food has been severely reduced. And that's not even beginning to get into sort of the need and for medical care and the lack of access to medical institutions, and the way that everything has been destroyed. I mean, if you go from sort of south central part of Gaza, where I am in right now, to Gaza City, where I was over the weekend, there in this weird, bizarre, twisted universe that we're in, flour is in huge abundance. The bakeries are open, except that's all that you can actually find. All you can buy in Gaza City to eat is basically flour. And on the rare occasion that something else shows up there, a single banana, costs $25. And then, of course, you have the entire besieged area in the north, where around 90 humanitarian missions have either been denied or impeded by Israel.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more we could talk about. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We certainly appreciate all the work you're doing, all your work your organization doing to at least make a small difference. Arwa Damon joining us live from Gaza. Thank you.